前の力はこんなものじゃないだろう。
Many of you guys have pointed out that a recent video I uploaded talking about how future Gohan's death actually meant something in Dragon Ball had an eerie coincidental upload timing to a recent Dokkan event in which future Gohan managed to defeat the androids. And let me just say right here that that's just purely a coincidence. The reason why I uploaded that video on September 12th, it was supposed to be for September 11th, but there were some editing issues that I had to push back a little bit. And the reason I did that video is because I thought, because of how horrific September 11th was in real life, that I would do a more sadder topic, you know, around that time period. And that was just essentially the reasoning between the timing of the upload. But many of you have actually asked me to do an actual what if on what if future Gohan actually defeated the future android somehow, and how it would change Dragon Ball history. Now, let me make it crystal clear at the absolute beginning of this video that I do not believe that this is a realistic what-if scenario in any way possible for a variety of different reasons. We will first begin with training. When you look at future Gohan, he had no training partners up until the point where Trunks was older and was strong enough to even spar with him, because the manga shows that Trunks was already a Super Saiyan training with Gohan and implies that they were at least training together for a while. Whereas the anime adaptation made it seem like Trunks never trained with Gohan throughout his entire life, and one day after the androids had attacked the city, it's like Trunks decided that he finally wanted to become a student of Gohan, which made it seem like they were training for a lot less time. But when you consider the fact that the manga version of Trunks already knew how to go Super Saiyan, you would think they were at least training for a lot more time. So because of this, Gohan was at a handicap because he didn't have anybody who was alive and strong enough to push him into becoming a lot stronger, because even though Gohan was very complimentary towards the young Trunks in the manga adaptation, you have to go back and look at the fact that Gohan was fighting off a Super Saiyan Kid Trunks in his base form with one arm, which clearly means that even though he was complimentary and thought that Trunks could pass him in a few months, there was clearly still a massive power gap. And when Trunks finally got strong enough to train with Gohan years later, Gohan was already dead. Now, we also have to point out, too, that Gohan had no assisted training. So this is a version of Gohan that never went into the Room of Spirit and Time, and this is also a version of Gohan that never had any gravity training. So in terms of actual training, he would have never have gotten the specific ingredients to make him strong enough to fight the androids. And the last big reason as to why future Gohan never reached his full potential, even though there's a whole lot more, is the fact that he never had the vision. You gotta remember that this is a version of Gohan that only witnessed Super Saiyan and never thought to manipulate the Super Saiyan form into becoming another transformation which can aid him in battle. This is a Gohan that never had that vision, but this is very different because when you look at the main timeline and you see what the more experienced fighters were doing, they had the idea that they could get stronger by learning and improving their Super Saiyan transformations, and because Gohan lacked this vision in the future timeline, he was never able to really get stronger because he thought Super Saiyan was the best a Saiyan could ever get, which makes the manga adaptation more bleak and hopeless than the anime adaptation because of the fact that in the anime, there was all of this talk of Gohan wanting Trunks to become a Super Saiyan, but he lacked the motivation. But in the future timeline, Trunks had Super Saiyan, Gohan had Super Saiyan, and neither of them stood a chance against the androids. But apart from just trading, there are also major disadvantages that future Gohan has, and we would have to pick what specific point he would kill the androids, because you're talking about a Gohan who has one arm, and then Gohan is also in a potential 2v1. Remember, in the manga adaptation, Gohan only fought against 17, which makes it even more hopeless too, because if 17 alone can kill him, that means that if Gohan could realistically defeat or get an edge against 17, 18 would just jump in and he would stand no chance. And last but not least, this is something that a lot of you guys have talked to me about in the comment section about emotions, because If you look at future Gohan, he's a lot less emotional as compared to the main timeline version of Gohan, who was a much younger Gohan, and because he was much younger and he didn't have that control over his emotions as much, that was actually a gift in a way. But the problem with Gohan's emotions was that he was never able to use his emotions in a controlled manner until he came out of the Room of Spirit and Time, then turned into a Super Saiyan 2 against Cell. His emotions always were like an explosion of attacking his opponent, but it was never something that he could actually use in a controlled form. Because the problem is, when he was younger, he was too young and inexperienced to fight the android, so even if he had an emotional outburst, it wouldn't have been enough, and as an adult, he didn't even have the emotional part that would have helped. So for all of those reasons, we are saying that this is an unrealistic what if. But what if we have fun with the topic and say that one day, as an adult, let's just use the final battle that Gohan had as an example, he somehow just got really angry and managed to kill 17 and 18. Now this creates a lot of questions about the future timeline, and the first one is, well, how would this change the way Trunks is? We've talked before at length about how a training partner has a significant impact on your growth. Gohan was stronger than Trunks, so when the stronger person dies, it makes it harder for the weaker person to get stronger. Just look at Gohan, for example. Goku and Piccolo died, and look at how hard it was for him to get stronger in that timeline. But despite that disadvantage, Trunks managed to at least approximate Gohan's strength in those 3 years. In a world where Gohan killed the androids, would Trunks be a lot weaker because the androids are gone, considering the fact that Trunks is the only other person who could fight with him? I feel that Trunks and Gohan would still continue to train and fight in that world because the world is still destroyed and it's going to take a lot of time for humanity to rebuild itself. As a matter of fact, I think Trunks would have gotten even more powerful considering that Gohan would have stayed alive and it would have helped him with his training, and at the same time, that also means that Gohan would have gotten a lot stronger too, because as Trunks gets stronger, Gohan would have gotten stronger too, and it would have been mutually beneficial for both. Now, with the trajectory of these two stronger Saiyans, what would happen next? The next major threat would be Cell when he eventually shows up. Now the thing is that with the androids gone, it's very likely that with a lot of training far into the future that Gohan and Trunks together could defeat one imperfect Cell. And as a post-edit, it's also important to mention that the future version of Cell would be a lot weaker than what we saw in the main timeline, because in the future timeline he can only absorb the small amount of humans that are still left alive. And you have to factor in that even if Gohan was able to defeat the androids and humanity started rebuilding itself earlier, humanity would still have a lot more people than what Cell would have had later on when he showed up, but it wouldn't have been enough humans for Cell to become significantly stronger than a combined duo of Gohan and Trunks. Now, you have to remember that we're talking about the original timeline of Dragon Ball, which is almost a parallel of the history of Trunks' timeline, except to the point where, because there was a timeline divergence, Trunks became self-aware that Cell was a time traveler, and as a result of that, when he went back to the future, he managed to actually kill Cell instead of Cell hijacking him, and also that version of Trunks had actually gotten stronger in the Room of Spirit and Time in the present timeline, whereas the Trunks in the original timeline that went to the unseen timeline, which is a whole other conversation for another day, most likely killed the androids by a deactivation device, based off of a whole bunch of things that I've already explained in another video. But the point that we're trying to get at here is that one Cell versus two hybrid Saiyans that constantly train is not going to win that fight in all likelihood. So I do feel that we can confidently say that Cell would have lost to a combined Gohan and Trunks force. Now, and you can potentially look at this as good news too, but if Cell were to somehow defeat them, he wouldn't be able to go back to the past and cause even more problems and more timelines. But now that leads us to an even bigger question. Would Bulma have finished the time machine in this what-if scenario? This is a complex question because there's a divergence between the manga and the anime, because if you look at the anime adaptation, right after future Gohan lost his arm and was beaten up by the androids and Trunks brought him home after Gohan had given him a senzu bean, you can see in the background that the anime version of future Bulma was already working on a time machine. So how do we make a judgment call on this? Well, when you go back to a conversation that future Trunks had with everybody on a plane, he talked about how Bulma wanted to create a better reality than the world that they had had. And once again, the true answer is bad writing, but for whatever reason in the future timeline, King Kai and the Namekians never got in contact with any of our heroes. So as a result of it, Gohan never had any ability to bring anybody from the dead back to life and have any additional assistance. So because of this, all of this would suggest that Bulma would still create a time machine. But here's the thing. In trying to bring up what would happen if Bulma actually made a time machine, that actually leads to a completely different conversation. So we're going to focus this video strictly on the future timeline and assume that these characters just continue to live their lives and Bulma stopped the production of trying to create a time machine, because that's a whole other topic that would take a lot more time to go into. So without creating a time machine, where does this lead all of us? By crossing our fingers and hoping that at some point the Namekians on New Namek somehow found a way to get in contact with them, even though the writing wasn't designed for them to do this at this point, because the whole New Namek thing really came into the Android arc where Goku had instant transmission and he can go find them and fix all of these problems. If the Namekians were somehow able to use the Dragon Balls and bring back the Z Fighters, that at least gives us some hope. Now, granted, they would still be a lot weaker than what they would have been in the main timeline for all of the battles that they got, theoretical Zenkai booster training, or all of the different things that they went through in transformations. So with all of that said, our heroes most likely would have had a positive outcome if we cross out some future ultimatums going into Dragon Ball Super, like Beerus destroying Earth, Frieza somehow coming back, or Zeno just deciding to erase everybody from existence just because. Because remember, in the History of Trunks timeline, Zeno erased everybody, but that was because of Zamasu, and in this situation, Zamasu would have never have interacted with her characters because Goku found out about Zamasu because of future Trunks travel to the past. But with no time traveling, then there's really no possible way that Goku Black would have been created. So ultimately, guys, the biggest what-if killer is that if Babidi and Dabura show up really early, our heroes are completely busted. And by heroes, we just mean Trunks and Gohan, before the Namekians far in the future ever made any attempt to help our heroes. And remember, we're just making that up to create the idea of a possible outcome. But it really just ends with Babidi and Dabura, because there's literally no way Gohan and Trunks would have ever gotten that strong with no assistance, no training, no knowledge of what they learned in the present timeline. And the problem with the Namekian Dragon Balls is that the Namekian Dragon Balls can only bring people back who didn't die of natural causes, which is why if you go back to Guru came back very briefly because he died of a broken heart because of all of the Namekians dying on his planet. Now, Goku died of a heart virus, which means that this is a timeline where Goku could literally never come back, unless a Z-Sword is broken or somebody like breaks the divine rules for him. There's really no way Goku can come back, and the problem with it is Goku not coming back is very bad, because even if he's not always the strongest character, as we saw in the main timeline, his leadership and ideas and decisions in these situations were an integral part of our character's survival. So without it, even if all of the other Z Fighters came back, they would stand no chance against future threats. So as you can see, guys, we tried as many positive routes as we possibly could, but without time travel, there's no possible way that this could lead to a good outcome. And whether or not it leads to a good outcome with time travel would take another 15 to 20 minutes in its own video.